Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and it'll be a follow-up from a few earlier videos, and I had a comment asking about this. And so the point is the origin of the Corinthian order. Now here we see two examples of Corinthian capitals. The one on the left is from the Pantheon in Rome, ancient example, and we have Corinthian capital here in Sydney in the State Library of New South Wales. So the column capitals is not the only feature which would define the Corinthian order. So here we see an older illustration, the three Greek orders of architecture, and so there are small details that would define what's the difference between a Doric, an Ionic, or a Corinthian temple, but not exclusively, but generally you can use the column design to separate them. Now, for instance, on the left we have the Doric order, and so you see the guy standing there and the column. Now that's because the Doric column represents the male. This is an example of a Doric column. These are the columns on the outside of the Pantheon in Athens. So the outside columns are Doric, but the temple itself is not Doric, it's Ionic because of the way that it's decorated. So, but we'll just be looking at the columns and just to give a bit of a context in regards to Corinthian. So Doric was the first of the Greek orders. Then we have the Ionic columns, and you can see one in the center, and the swirls sort of give it away. Now there are small variations on there, so that's just a classic Ionic, but those swirls at the side give it away. Now there are variations in different styles, but let's just stick with the common forms. And we have the Corinthian column. Now they also represent, for instance, the Doric is the male, the Ionic is the woman, and the Corinthian is the maiden or the virgin. And these are also known as Doric being the column of strength, the male, the Ionic being the column of wisdom, the woman, and the Corinthian being the column of beauty or the maiden. So the swirls, which define the Ionic column, are said to represent the simplistic beauty of a woman's hairstyle, as opposed to the Corinthian column, the column of beauty, the maiden, where it's much more elaborate. So again, like in the old days, to make the unmarried woman, still not too different now. The younger the person, usually they'll, more fancy hair, more clothes and that type of stuff as a general rule. And so that's why it's the column of beauty, the maiden column. Now we look here at a Mason tracing board, and so for instance you might notice two columns is actually three. So we have this column and we have this one, but there's also one here in the center which is partially obscured. Now these also represent the three Greek orders. So on the left is the Doric column, in the center we see the Ionic column, you can see the swirl, and on the right we have the Corinthian column. Doric is strength, Ionic is wisdom, and Corinthian is beauty. We'll come back to that. So back to, on the left is the Pantheon in Rome, and on the right is the, here in Sydney, the State Library. Two examples. Now in the centre we see a picture of the tragic Choragic monument of Lysikrates, I think is the pronunciation, pardon me if I've got it wrong. That's the one that's in Athens. You can get colour photos, it's still there. And on either side I have pictures of a replica that's here in Sydney in the Botanical Gardens. Now, Choragic monument's pretty important because it is said to be the perfect form of Corinthian design and columns. But there are variations that go through those, but you can, as we'll show in a moment, but there's what really gives it away is these leaves. These are acanthus leaves. That's a defining thing of all Corinthian, and you can see the leaves as well. But here, these volutes, these at the corners, now they look sort of like the Ionic swirl, but they're they're different, the way that they're formed, and we'll come, because that's a defining feature of Corinthian columns. Temple of Olympian Zeus in Athens. There in the background you can see the Acropolis and the Parthenon there on top. 1650 feet away. What we have here is the Temple of Olympian Zeus. It was begun, I think, around 4 BC, as originally as a Doric. It was completed, again, I think, around 200 AD, maybe 300 AD, by the Romans, but it became the because it was sort of stopped and started, but it's usually said that this is the first true Corinthian temple. Because it has Corinthian columns doesn't define it as Corinthian, but what does is all the weights, the proportions, the details, the way that it's decorated, and so it's, yeah, it has Corinthian columns, but again, that's not what. That is a very important feature, but it's not the only feature that would define it as a Corinthian temple. The Pantheon in Rome. Now you can see, now these are granite columns, and you can see the Corinthian capitals, but these are the old original ones. They're made out of marble. Now you can see these three on the side here. They're much higher in detail because they were replaced, I think around 1600. For a few centuries there was like a big brick wall that was supporting that part of the portico. So these columns and the capitals were replaced. But on the inside of the Pantheon, we can see all the little, Corinthian column capitals. I think it was at a pilaster, because but also it's worth noting, see these little bits, now I forget what they're called, corbels. Okay, they also have the acanthus design, the acanthus leaf being the defining feature of Corinthian style. Now, I could show so many examples going through history. There was even, so with the Byzantine through to the medieval period, different areas they started to change slightly, but so I'm not covering those at the moment. I'm sticking with the traditional ancient style. Joresh in Jordan, so along Palmyra, Baalbek, Joresh and Petra are all trading cities. They're all on the edge of the desert, the first place that the people crossing the desert come out and get water. That's why Joresh, Baalbek, Palmyra, Petra were so wealthy long before the Romans, but that's one of the reasons why, because they were so rich, they were able to afford especially these elaborate Corinthian designs. So you can see the Corinthian capitals, but also at the base of the columns here we have these pilasters, which are again the acanthus design, which is a central feature. Again, Petra in Jordan, just like Joresh, Palmyra, Baalbek, trade cities on the edge of a desert, first place, for watering the animals. But again, Corinthian design, and not just the capital, it's these other little features as well. So okay, I won't go into that for now. Also, what they call Greco-Buddhist architecture. It's especially in the Kushan Empire. So in between, you had Rome, then you had Persia, then you had the Kushan Empire, then you had the Indians, and the Kushan Empire, Buddhist, but they also changed the style of architecture. It's only recently they found a statue in modern-day Pakistan, and it got smashed up because of modern religious reasons, but the Kushan Empire, Greco-Buddhist architecture. So again, you can see how the acanthus design, even amongst the Buddhists there, Greco-Buddhist architecture, older Indian sculpture, for instance, was a little bit different, and then the Greek style, Roman style of very detailed photorealistic sculpture was a big influence and changed and influenced that part of the world, but it sees use of these Corinthian capitals. And then we could just sort of skip forward a little bit, and then we come to just say 1600s and neoclassical movement, where the architects, builders were starting to go back to the original style. And so US Capitol building, of course, come a bit later. A lot of examples I just want to show. So US Capitol building, Corinthian capitals, but also these little corbels around the side there, acanthus design. Just Corinthian now. These are in the National Arboretum in Washington, sandstone columns these ones are. They are originally part of US Capitol building and moved away. You can see an illustration of the US Capitol building. St. Paul's in London, Corinthian, like hundreds and hundreds of examples, ancient and modern. Pantheon in Paris, again, these are really nice detail and design that goes into these. You can see the US Capitol building, same sort of neoclassical design. And the July Monument in Paris as well. Now again, notice the acanthus sleeves at the bottom and these volutes. So there are variations, but there are giveaways to the basis of the design of these. So now that's I'll get a higher res picture in a moment, but where is this? Is this the Odium? Again, we see this old. This is Palatine Hill in Rome, and the again Corinthian design, and it's nice because we have a acanthus plant growing there. Acanthus, that's the basis of the design. Very important plant, but in the future I'll do more on that. Okay, so here we see holding the acanthus leaf against there to give that's the basis of the design. And this image is not an ancient drawing, but describes an ancient event, which what's happening here is the basis of how the legend goes about the creation of the Corinthian design with these acanthus leaves and then the volutes. I'll show it better in a moment. So, okay, evolution of the Corinthian capital. For instance, I mentioned the Horologium monument. Epidaurus, Tower of the Winds, which is a slight variation. I'll show it in a moment. Temple of Apollo. But in the comment, they're asking about this image here, and it's fabled origin. There we see a natural acanthus leaf, and then the typical Greek leaf, and the typical Roman leaf. Those are those leaves here. So just to zoom in on that, and because it's when I zoom in, you lose a bit of the image. So here's another version of that image, and that's the story I'll explain in a moment. And it comes back to the architect Callimachus. He was a sculptor and an architect in the late 5th century BC, very important, influential. And these are some of the type of works attributed to Callimachus. Again, the classical Greek sculpture, and unlike this, like the drapery and the lines and the way that the cloth works, is again, it took sculpture to a whole new level of detail and photorealism. They were working because they loved marble but they were doing this in granite and basalt as well. It's the same technique, that materials, ways of working as well. But just because of when you're carving, depends what granite you're using, but granite and basalt just aren't really good because of the speckles and stuff. But marble tends to be such a clean stone, and that's why it's so good for working in sculpture. But Pausanias, in the 2nd century BC, I'm sure it was, or maybe, but Callimachus was quite important, and Pausanias said he was extremely clever and was able to drill holes through stone. But it was more than that. He was using drilling to create these folds in the drapery. So a lot of his undercutting, just you can't do it with chisels. Or you can, but it's really fiddly work, and it's not as nice. And so drilling is required, because the process, I've done plenty of examples, drilling in granite with copper, but the drilling process, depending on what a type of abrasive and the abrasive size, you can polish as you drill as well. So by drilling, you're also giving a polish to all these fine details. So drilling's also needed. So all this fine little detail and undercutting in Corinthian, like this, well, this is huge detail. Drilling is, if not absolutely necessary, is just not only a massive time saver, it just makes it that much better. And you reduce because to ruin, you can spend weeks and weeks and weeks, months creating a capital like this, and then with one slip of a chisel, it can just be ruined. And so drilling is also a much better way to do it because it reduces the amount of mistakes. But Callimachus, he's said to be the inventor of the Corinthian order gun in a moment, but the Erechtheion on the Acropolis in Athens as well, it's worth mentioning because another thing that's attributed to Callimachus was the golden lamp, or the asbestos lichnis, pardon the pronunciation again. And so inside the Erechtheion was a statue of Athena, but inside, because again, these old sort of Greek and this, you could not get light inside, you needed artificial lighting. And so he built a lamp which only needed to be refilled once a year, and the wick was asbestos, so the wick didn't burn. It burned, but it didn't burn away like a candle wick. An interesting note that the Egyptians were also using asbestos, even like with some of the wrapping for their mummies. But the interesting thing about this lamp, as it's told by Pausanias, was that he also added a bronze palm branch above the lamp, and that caught the smoke and stopped soot covering the walls. And I did a video a while back, ancient Egyptian lighting technology. So what the Egyptians did was that they used the natron, and they mixed it with the castor oil, mixed it with natron, and used that in their lamps, and that was a smokeless flame as described by Herodotus. So around about the same time as Callimachus was working with his lamp, I don't know what oil, if he was adding natron to it, but the ancient Egyptian, they were able to work in the dark without creating soot all over walls. This is again just one of these lingering points to try and, but that they were, again, it's mentioned also in antiquity. So castor oil and natron creates a smokeless flame, and I find it, I try to dig a little bit, but it's out of my pay grade, as they say, whether this bronze palm that Callimachus was using in the golden lamp to stop the smoke, especially in a marble temple, to create the soot. So whether there's some sort of, what do you call, electrostatic, that maybe, but the bronze was especially the smoke and the particles got attracted to the bronze. Could be, I don't know. I try to look into it, but it's, reading papers that are just, I don't have the skill set to go in that in detail without spending months and months. So that's an interesting question, I think. But the golden lamp, Callimachus, now we come to Callimachus and the origin of the Corinthian order. And so here we see what's called a crater. There's different so it's imagine like your classical church bell upside down. That's a crater. Now there are large jugs, smaller versions of them as well, but this is an important feature in regards to the origin of the Corinthian order and how it came about. So in Vitruvius, Book 4, he describes the Corinthian order, but he also tells the story of the invention of the Corinthian order and how the idea come to Callimachus, and I'll show that next, I take. Okay, so I did this sketch a while ago, but this is about the creation and the story behind the invention of the Corinthian order. So the Corinthian Column, the column of beauty or the virgin, but a freeborn maiden of Corinth. She was of marriage age. She became ill and suddenly died. So the girl's nurse collected all her favourite things, put them into a crater, a bell-shaped basket, and put them on her grave. On top of the crater, she put a tile, just to protect it a little bit longer from the elements. But the nurse didn't realise that underneath this crater was an acanthus root, and so I'm assuming because of just the nature of the way acanthus grows, as winter gave way, spring brought forth new life, rejuvenation, and this is so acanthus is connected with rejuvenation. It's also a funerary plant, and so you can see how as the acanthus root grew from underneath the crater, it was forced to follow this upside down bell-shaped jar and create those volutes. So those swirls on the corners of Corinthian columns are the acanthus leaf being forced to bend around. So just so happened that Callimachus came past, saw the shape of the acanthus being grown around this bell-shaped crater, and it inspired him to create the Corinthian Order of Architecture, beginning, of course, with the Corinthian capitals. So that's the essence of the origin of the story and why. And again, sort of acanthus is a whole other thing. I really have to get around to that, but those are Corinthian capitals. That's the origin story. Okay, so that's the fabled origin. So we begin with the crater, the basket, connected with the passing of a virgin, the maiden, and again the acanthus leaf designs that the essence of Corinthian capitals, but also more broader the Corinthian temple style decorations. Now there are all sorts of, so there's also Rome, so of the 3 Greek orders, then there are the 5 Roman orders. The 5th Roman order, which is called the Composite or Roman Corinthian, is a bit more elaborate, but sticking with the Greek orders for now. So there's your natural acanthus, the Greek typical, and the typical Roman style. You can see a sculptor holding up the acanthus leaf to show the design, and there we have a natural acanthus leaf here in Sydney. Now if you do that comparison, you can see the crater, the jar, the jug, or the cup as well. There's a constellation called Crater with a K, and then the tile on top, and how it caused the leaf to bend and turn. So those volutes, these swirls at the corner, are that design. So you can see how that's the inspiration for it, and then we just have the acanthus leaves around the base there. Now the many variations, the most notable one is the Tower of the Winds, Corinthian style, and there you can see it doesn't have the volutes, but it's again, acanthus is a defining feature, but this was fused with a Egyptian style of bell capital, which have these volute forms, but not of the typical acanthus shaping. I did a video on the Tower of the Winds. Very interesting. It's based on the golden ratio. Was essentially a lab for timekeeping as well. I'll try to remember to put that link in the description, because that essentially unique form, Tower of the Winds. So then again, we see this column capital here in Sydney in the Centennial Gardens. These used to be at the Sydney Museum building by James Barnett, and the rest of the building is classical Corinthian, but 9 of these columns were moved to the Centennial Park. So the column of beauty, or the column for maiden, is Corinthian. Wisdom of a woman is the Ionic column, and Doric, or the man, is the column of strength. So these are the 3 Greek orders. There's interesting history behind these, so for instance, the earliest Greek temples, most of them are actually in southern Italy. The evolution of the Doric style, and then the beginning of the Ionic styles, and then up to the Corinthian and the 3rd Greek Order of Architecture. But I'll do it separate. But like, for instance, we still see this symbolism built into Freemasons, which originated from the stonemasons, and so again the Doric, Ionic, and the Corinthian. And I'll do it as a separate video, but there's also, if you're into your symbolism, the connections between the story of the origin of the Corinthian and the maiden, or the weeping virgin, and the broken Corinthian column as well. It's a nice little details about that as well. But I'll do that in a separate video. But that's there's the origin, some of the basic point. Again, you can see another image of the original origin of the Corinthian with the leaves or the flowers as well. But that's a whole couple of like long extended explorations that go into all these smaller details in regards to the Corinthian order. So I hope that answers some of the questions, and cheers SGD, have a good one.